In the modern kitchen, nutmeg is the scent of comfort. It is the subtle, warming background note in a holiday pumpkin pie, a light dusting on a cup of eggnog, or the secret ingredient in a rich, savory bechamel sauce. It is cheap, ubiquitous, and seemingly harmless. But do not let its current domesticity fool you. 500 years ago, this modest seed was the center of a geopolitical storm that reshaped the world map. It was a luxury so coveted that men crossed uncharted oceans, built the first global megacorporations, and devastated entire civilizations to possess it. For centuries, every single nutmeg consumed anywhere on Earth came from one microscopic point in the vast expanse of the Pacific Ocean, a tiny cluster of volcanic islands known as the Banda Archipelago. This is the history of how a tree seed became more valuable than gold, how it sparked the first corporate genocide in human history, and how it was ultimately traded for a swampy North American island called Manhattan. To understand the history of nutmeg, we must first understand the island chain that gave it birth. Deep within the Banda Sea, in eastern Indonesia's Maluku province, lies a cluster of 11 tiny volcanic islets. Collectively, they are barely larger than a speck on a standard globe. Yet for thousands of years, these islands possessed a biological monopoly. Here grew Myristica fragrans, a dark-leaved evergreen tree that thrived exclusively in the rich, well-drained volcanic soil and humid, rain-soaked climate of the Bandas. The tree produces a small, fleshy fruit, not unlike an apricot or a plum. When ripe, this fruit splits open to reveal one of the most remarkable sights in the natural world. This single fruit produces not one, but two distinct spices. The dark, hard seed inside is the nutmeg. The vibrant, blood-red membrane that wraps around the seed is known as mace. Both possess distinct but complementary aromatic profiles. Mace is subtle, citrusy and warm, while nutmeg is intense, sweet and deeply pungent. Long before Europeans even knew the Pacific Ocean existed, nutmeg was a traveler. Because the trees grew nowhere else, any mention of nutmeg in ancient records confirms a vast, interconnected web of prehistoric trade. Archaeological digs in India have recovered carbonized nutmeg, dating back to 400 BCE. By the 1st century BCE, Chinese Han Dynasty texts noted its presence in southern ports. It was carried across oceans by Austronesian sailors, passed to Hindu and Buddhist merchants, traded to Arab and Persian sailors, and eventually sold to European buyers at the end of the Silk Road. The Roman writer Pliny the Elder wrote of a foreign tree that produced a fragrant nut, a luxury used by the Roman elite as an incense and a perfume. Yet, throughout this long journey, the source of the spice remained a closely guarded secret. The Middle Eastern and Asian merchants who controlled the intermediate trade routes deliberately spun fantastic, terrifying tales of sea monsters, winged serpents, and impenetrable forests to keep European competitors from seeking the origin of their wealth. By the High Middle Ages, nutmeg had become more than just a culinary status symbol for European nobility. It had become a matter of life and death. In 1346, the Black Death swept through Europe, wiping out nearly a third of the population. Helpless in the face of the plague, physicians looked desperately for preventatives. Under the prevailing medical theory of the time, the miasma theory, diseases were believed to be spread by bad, foul-smelling air, or pestilential vapors. To combat this bad air, those who could afford it wore pomanders, small decorative perforated metal balls filled with aromatic spices, around their necks or waists. Nutmeg, with its incredibly strong, oily and lasting scent, was considered the ultimate defense. The 12th century mystic Saint Hildegard of Bingen wrote that nutmeg possessed great warmth and closed the mind, keeping the spirit pure and healthy. In Elizabethan England, the belief that nutmeg could prevent the plague reached a fever pitch. Because of its perceived medicinal properties and its sheer rarity, the price of nutmeg skyrocketed to astronomical heights. In the late Middle Ages, a mere handful of nutmeg in Europe could buy a permanent estate, complete with land, a house and servants. At its peak, a single pound of the spice was valued at the equivalent of 7 fat oxen. This extreme price made nutmeg a vital status symbol. Wealthy men and women carried personal, pocket-sized nutmeg graters made of silver or ivory. To casually pull out a personal grater at a dining table and shave a bit of nutmeg onto one's food was the ultimate demonstration of wealth, the modern equivalent of driving a luxury supercar. But in 1453, the geopolitical landscape fractured. The Ottoman Empire conquered Constantinople, seizing control of the land-based trade routes between Europe and Asia. The supply of spices slowed to a trickle, and prices soared even higher. Europe was suffocating. If the European kingdoms wanted their spices, they could no longer rely on Arab, Persian, or Venetian middlemen. They had to bypass the Silk Road entirely. They had to take to the oceans. This desperate search for the home of nutmeg, cloves, and black pepper launched what historians call the Age of Discovery. When Christopher Columbus sailed west in 1492, his royal sponsors were not looking for a new continent. They were looking for a direct route to the Spice Islands. Columbus died believing he had reached the East Indies, but his failure only intensified the race. It was the Portuguese who broke the deadlock. In 1498, Vasco da Gama rounded the southern tip of Africa and charted a sea route directly to India. Armed with heavily fortified, cannon-bearing ships, the Portuguese crown aimed to seize control of the Indian Ocean trade by force. In 1511, the Portuguese Viceroy of India, Afonso de Albuquerque, set his sights on the crown jewel of Southeast Asian trade, the Sultanate of Malacca, located on the modern-day Malay Peninsula. Malacca was the gatekeeper of the spice trade, the point where Chinese, Indian, and Javanese merchant vessels met. Albuquerque attacked. Malacca fell after a brutal siege. With the gateway open, the viceroy wasted no time. He immediately dispatched a fleet of 3 ships under the command of Antonio de Abreu and Francisco Serrao. Their mission was simple: find the legendary Spice Islands. Guided by local Javanese pilots, the Portuguese ships slipped into the Banda Sea in early 1512. When they dropped anchor in the quiet harbor of Bandaneira, they became the first Europeans to set foot on the home of the nutmeg. What they found was not a unified kingdom or an empire, but a unique decentralized society. The Banda Islands were ruled by local elders known as the Orang Kaya, literally, the rich men or the men of wealth. The Bandanese were seasoned, highly successful traders who had maintained a peaceful, free market hub for centuries, trading their nutmeg and mace for food, textiles from India, and porcelain from China. The Portuguese were ecstatic. They purchased massive quantities of nutmeg and mace for a fraction of their European value. However, the Portuguese soon discovered that physically holding a monopoly on these distant islands was nearly impossible. They lacked the manpower, the resources, and the administrative structure to fortify and police a tiny archipelago thousands of miles from their home base. For nearly a century, the Portuguese maintained a loose, lucrative trade agreement with the Bandanese, but they could not stop other traders from slipping in. But the era of peaceful trade was about to come to a violent, bloody end. In 1602, the newly independent Dutch Republic made a move that would change the history of capitalism. Several competing merchant firms merged to form the Verenigde Oostindische Compagnie, or the VOC, the Dutch East India Company. The VOC was unlike any entity the world had ever seen. It was not merely a trading firm, it was a corporate state. It had the power to wage wars, build fortresses, mint its own currency, maintain its own private armies, and execute prisoners, all without the direct control of the Dutch government. And its primary objective was simple: complete, absolute, global monopoly over the spice trade. When the Dutch arrived in the Banda Islands, they were not interested in buying nutmeg alongside other nations. They demanded that the Orang Kaya sign treaties granting the VOC exclusive rights to all nutmeg and mace. But the Bandanese were free market traders. The Dutch treaties prohibited them from selling to their traditional partners, the English, Javanese, Chinese, and Javanese Malay merchants, who offered better prices and essential food supplies. The Bandanese quietly bypassed the Dutch restrictions, smuggling their spices out under the cover of night. To the VOC directors, this was not survival. It was a breach of contract. In 1618, a man named Jan Pieter Zoon Cohen was appointed Governor-General of the Dutch East Indies. Cohen was a brilliant administrator, but he was also a man of terrifying, single-minded ruthlessness. He famously wrote that trade could not be conducted without war, nor war without trade. and urged them not to spare their enemies. In 1621, Cohen decided to resolve the Banda problem once and for all. He arrived in the Banda Islands with a fleet of 19 ships and over 14,600 Dutch soldiers, and a contingent of elite samurai mercenaries hired from Japan. His orders were simple: systematic, total pacification. What followed was the Banda Massacre, the first recorded corporate genocide in history. Cohen's forces systematically swept through the islands. They burned villages, they destroyed local boats, and hunted down the indigenous population. 40 of the most prominent, Orang Kaya, were falsely accused of treason and rounded up. They were brutally executed by Japanese mercenaries under Dutch supervision. They were beheaded, and their bodies were quartered and displayed on bamboo stakes as a warning. The rest of the population faced a grimmer fate. Those who were not killed outright starved on rocky cliffs, or they were rounded up to be shipped to Batavia, modern-day Jakarta, into chattel slavery. Before the Dutch invasion of 1621, the population of the Banda Islands was estimated to be around 15,000 people. Within a matter of months, the population was decimated. Historical records indicate that only about 500 to 1,000 Bandanese survived on the islands. Most survived as forced laborers, or managed to escape to neighboring archipelagos. An entire ancient wealthy civilization was wiped off the face of the earth. All to protect the profit margins of a corporate spice monopoly. With the native population eliminated, Cohen divided the vacant nutmeg plantations into parcels called perken. He leased these to retired VOC officers and Dutch colonists, who became known as perkeneers. To work these lands, the VOC imported thousands of enslaved people from East Africa, India, and Indonesia. To prevent any rival nation from growing nutmeg elsewhere, the Dutch enacted a policy of extreme ecological paranoia. Every single nutmeg, designated for export, was systematically dipped in a bath of slaked lime before being shipped. This process did not affect the flavor of the spice, but it rendered the seed completely infertile, ensuring that no live seeds could be planted outside of Dutch control. Anyone caught smuggling, possessing, or planting a fertile nutmeg seed without VOC authorization faced a simple, unyielding penalty: death. Despite their brutal campaign, the Dutch monopoly was not entirely complete. There was one tiny, stubborn loophole: Pulau Run. Run is a tiny island on the western fringe of the Banda Group, measuring barely 2 miles long and less than a mile wide. Unlike the other islands, Run was defended by a small force from the VOC's bitterest rival, the English East India Company. In 1616, before the Great Massacre, the Bandanese of Run, desperate for protection from the Dutch, had signed an agreement with an English merchant named Nathaniel Corthope. They formally pledged allegiance to King James I of England, giving the English their first ever overseas colonial possession. For 4 years, Corthope and a handful of English sailors, alongside local Bandanese, held out against a brutal Dutch siege. The English were starving, cut off from all supplies. Yet, they refused to surrender this tiny rock. In 1620, Corthope was killed in a skirmish at sea. Without his leadership, the English defense collapsed, and the Dutch seized the island, promptly destroying the English nutmeg plantations to ensure they could not be used. But the English never forgot their claim to Run Island. It became a festering wound in Anglo-Dutch relations, sparking decades of maritime skirmishes, and helping to trigger the bloody Anglo-Dutch Wars. By 1667, the Second Anglo-Dutch War had ground to a halt. Both nations were exhausted and eager to settle their territorial disputes. They met in the Dutch city of Breda to hammer out a peace treaty. The negotiations were incredibly complex. Both nations had captured territories from each other during the war. The English had seized the Dutch colony of New Amsterdam in North America, a small, muddy fur-trading outpost on Manhattan Island. Meanwhile, the Dutch had secured their grip on Suriname in South America. And crucially, they had recaptured the tiny, nutmeg-rich island of Run in the East Indies. Under the rules of international diplomacy at the time, each nation could choose to return what they had captured, or propose a trade. To the Dutch, the choice was obvious. Manhattan was a cold, swampy, contested island in North America. surrounded by hostile native tribes and British colonies. It produced fur, but little else of immediate, massive value. Run Island, on the other hand, was the final piece of the global nutmeg monopoly. If the Dutch held Run, they held the entire global supply of the world's most valuable spice. On July 31, 1667, the Treaty of Breda was signed. The terms were finalized. The English agreed to officially cede their claim to Run Island in the Pacific to the Dutch. In exchange, the Dutch officially ceded their claim to New Amsterdam to the English. The English promptly renamed their new American territory. In honor of the king's brother, the Duke of York, New Amsterdam became New York. At the time, the Dutch believed they had achieved a masterstroke of diplomacy. They had traded away a useless American island for a complete, airtight global monopoly on nutmeg. For the next century, they would reap unimaginable fortunes from this deal. While Manhattan remained a relatively minor colonial port, only history would reveal who truly got the better end of the bargain. For over a century, the Dutch monopoly seemed unbreakable. The VOC guard ships patrolled the Banda Sea tirelessly, and the slaked lime baths continued to sterilize every nutmeg that left the harbor. But the Dutch had not accounted for the determination of a French horticulturalist, diplomat, and professional rogue, named Pierre Poivre. Pierre Poivre, whose last name literally translates to Peter Pepper, was a man obsessed with breaking the Dutch and Portuguese monopolies on spices. Having lost his left arm to a cannonball in a naval battle, he was not a man easily deterred. He believed that France should not be dependent on its rivals for these luxury goods. Operating under the commission of the French crown, Poivre embarked on a highly dangerous, undercover mission of industrial espionage. In the late 1760s, Poivre organized a series of clandestine expeditions to the outer edges of the Moluccas. He bribed local officials, made contacts with anti-Dutch Javanese traders, and navigated through waters mapped with deliberately deceptive Dutch charts. In 1769 and 1770, his efforts paid off. In a daring operation, Poivre successfully smuggled dozens of live, fertile nutmeg seedlings and clove plants out of the East Indies. Poivre brought his stolen treasures to the French island colonies of Mauritius and Réunion in the Indian Ocean. There, in the fertile soil of the local botanical gardens, he carefully nurtured the delicate seedlings. The Dutch monopoly was shattered. Within a few years, the French were successfully harvesting their own nutmeg, completely independent of the VOC. The British soon followed suit. During the Napoleonic Wars, the British military temporarily seized control of the Banda Islands from the Dutch. Before returning the islands, the British East India Company transplanted nutmeg seedlings to their own colonies, including Penang in Malaysia, Singapore, Sri Lanka, and the West Indies. The spice thrived spectacularly in the Caribbean, particularly on the island of Grenada. Today, Grenada is known worldwide as the Spice Isle, and the nutmeg remains so central to its national identity and economy that it is featured proudly on the country's national flag. By the early 19th century, nutmeg was being grown all over the tropical world. The price collapsed, and the luxury that had once sparked empires and justified massacres became a common household ingredient, accessible to everyone. As nutmeg became a standard pantry item, science finally began to unlock the secrets behind the spice's mysterious allure. Why was this seed so highly prized? Why did ancient mystics and medieval doctors believe it possessed supernatural powers? The answer lies in its unique chemical composition. Nutmeg contains a natural organic compound called myristicin. Myristicin is a psychoactive substance. In small culinary doses, such as the pinch you find in a cake or a cup of eggnog, it is completely harmless and merely adds flavor. However, in massive doses, myristicin acts as a potent deliriant and hallucinogen. Throughout history, when other intoxicants were unavailable, sailors, soldiers, and prison inmates turned to raw nutmeg, often referred to as nutmeg prison tea, to induce long-lasting, often terrifying hallucinations. But this psychoactivity comes at a terrible price. In high doses, nutmeg is highly toxic, causing severe nausea, rapid heart rates, organ damage, and a state of delirium that can last for days, often described as an incredibly painful, prolonged hangover. This chemical potency explains why medieval herbalists found it so effective as a stimulant and pain reliever. It was not a magical shield against the plague, but its natural anesthetic properties did help dull the agonizing pain of the sick. Today, the legacy of the Nutmeg Wars is written into the very fabric of our modern world. Consider the fate of the two islands traded in the Treaty of Breda in 1667. Manhattan, which the Dutch so eagerly traded away, grew to become the financial and cultural capital of the world. Pulau Run, the tiny island the Dutch killed to possess, is today a quiet, isolated tropical outpost in the Banda Sea. Its days of global prominence have faded into history. The descendants of the Javanese, Chinese, and Javanese Malay laborers who survived the colonial era still harvest nutmeg from the old trees. But the spice that once commanded the wealth of kings is now sold for a small fraction of its historical value. The next time you reach into your pantry for that little jar of nutmeg, take a moment to look at the simple, unassuming seed. Behind this simple spice lies a century of exploration. The birth of modern corporate capitalism, the rise of global cities, and the tragic, silent ghosts of those who died on the remote beaches of the Banda Islands. It is a reminder that the history of our world is often written not in the grand declarations of kings, but in the quiet, aromatic dust of our kitchens.